There are so many times that all through life, it seems like our life gets into this rhythm. Or, if I can use the word, cadence. And it seems like as you begin to look at life in this cadence, you begin to wonder, why is all of this going on and why is this happening? Well, you need to understand something. In the very beginning of time, when God created, and the very beginning of the book, and we'll talk about it this morning, you're going to actually see that God got into a rhythm or cadence, even in the creation. And when you begin to look at it and understand that everything God did, he said, and everything that we do, he even tells us in church, let everything be done in decency and in order. That there's a cadence that goes along with this. There's a rhythm that goes along with it. That doesn't mean that what we end up doing is becoming habitual, that we just do it without thinking. But yet sometimes we need to understand that in our life there are things that we do without thinking because we've gotten into this rhythm. We've gotten into this cadence that is going on. And so in order to understand what we're talking about, you need to define the word cadence, okay? And the dictionary definition of the word cadence is this. It is a modulation. Modulation means going up and down, okay? Not staying the same. You ever found a preacher who is monotone? What do? They put you to sleep. Because what ends up happening is you get into this, well, today let's all talk about Genesis chapter 1. And in Genesis chapter 1, this is what it says. And when they go in this monotone, you begin to lose sight of exactly what they're saying. It becomes boring. And so it's a modulation in reading aloud, as implied by the structure and the ordering of the words and also the phrases in the written text. My wife loves to listen to Harry Potter, probably 28 times. She would just put it on and drive, okay? Do you know that the guy who does the audiobook, one guy, he did all of the voices, every one of them, male, female, animals and all. He modulated his words, the tone. And you find in that modulation, it begins to build excitement or kind of gives you some things that are building up in the drama and everything else. And that's what we're talking about in the word cadence. And sometimes when we look at the word cadence, most of the time it's actually about someone's voice, okay? And it's used to describe them. But I don't want you to think about cadence the rest of the sermon. I don't want you to think, okay, is he going up, down, sideways, shifting? You know, what's he going to do? Don't worry about the tone because I'm going to fluctuate in and out in all of this, and hopefully it won't. You understand as we do this. But a good narrator of any book understands the very importance of keeping people interested and learning how to fluctuate in order to keep that interest in there. Otherwise, you're going to drop it. It's the same way in TV shows. You'll see them, what they'll do is they'll give you a little teaser about something that's going to happen later on. And then all of a sudden, the next 45 minutes, they're all engrossed in trying to take that little teaser and build it to a climax where at the end of the show. And at the end of the show, they leave you with a cliffhanger telling you, continue next week. Used to, all of the shows only had one week. They didn't continue to the second week or the third week. And they found out that sometimes they were losing their viewership and all of the things. So let's start building more. If it's a 30-minute show, let's build in something so that they got to come back next week and let's continue this storyline. And so now what you do is you have shows that a whole series for 13 weeks or 17 weeks or whatever that they're doing it. They've got a storyline that each week is building to the climax that's there. And then what do? They get you to the end of the series for that year or for that season, and they leave you with a cliffhanger. Thinking about, okay, how's it going to be next time? Is so-and-so coming back, or are they dead? And then you read in between that they lost their contract. Well, that really ruined that show for me. What's the sense in watching it? The person's not going to be there, and it's going to have to be somebody else, and so they have to do a different storyline and all of the things that are there. And so when you understand that, the same is not only true in books, it's also true in music. Okay? Let me show you. Did you mute this? Okay. Did you unmute it? Is it ready? Get the cadence and the beat is continuing as it continues to build in the music. And the world goes on. And this is how they do it. Life begins and ends in the dust you fall. They're keeping it going. It's not just a monotone and everything that's into it. And then they come to the chorus. This is called cadence. And so you'll find it not just in reading, you'll find it in music. And that's how they come up with good songs. They'll come up with this rhythm that's there, that piques your interest, and the songs that they're singing, okay? So one of the things that I learned a long, long time ago about cadence, which was really important. Matter of fact, it was almost 51 years ago in a couple of weeks. I was finishing up my high school. I was graduating at mid-session. Midterm after the first semester, and because we ran on quarters, and so you had at the end of each semester you would have to take an exam. So we were just coming back from New Year's, and getting ready for our final exams, and then I was going to go in the service. Okay. And in the service, you have to learn something. There is one person, or it could be multiple people, depending on how they do it, that they are the ones that are going to make your life miserable. They're called drill sergeants. They will tell you, going in there, okay, recruit, get up. You don't get up, the next thing you know, you're hearing this, get down and get me 50, recruit. And it's like, I've never done 50 push-ups in my life. And you're asking me to do that? Can't we just kind of build up to this stuff? No. And they would, and so what they would do is they would teach you to do a cadence. And it was like this: 1 drill sergeant, 2 drill sergeant, 3 drill sergeant, 4 drill sergeant. And then you'd start slowing down and they'd say, "You're slowing down." You pick up the cadence. And you started to learn that your whole life was built on that cadence. You would have about 100 guys marching in step because somebody was calling the cadence. Oh, left, right, left, oh, left, right, left. Then they would go left, 2, 3, 4, left, 2, 3, 4. And everybody's marching at the same beat and at the same time. And then they would say, "Okay, now let's run." And even in the running, you're learning a cadence. And then they would sing songs, and you would have to sing the song with them. You're learning new songs, new beats. And the whole thing that you're understanding is this: your life has got order. And we're going to teach you, when you let your life get out of order, it will bring you to chaos. And God started it all, trying to teach us that things fall in order, that there is a cadence that He did. And sometimes you need to understand, though, that in this cadence, whether it is rhythmic or if it is even chaotic. Have you ever watched your life once it started in chaos? It seems to continue in that chaos, following from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And it seems like what ends up happening is we get into this rhythm that doesn't stop. And it keeps going from place to place to place. If I could steal a phrase that I think would kind of help, you got to understand something. When God started creating things, He got in a groove. And He continued in that groove. And you need to understand something. If in the beginning, and God's doing all of this stuff, if getting in the groove was good enough for Him, don't you think it should be good enough for us to get into this cadence that He's asking us to do? And so let's go and let's start at the very beginning. As a matter of fact, that's what it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Look at what He says. In the beginning, God what? He created the heavens and the earth. In all of this, you need to understand something. In the very beginning, God is starting to create. He's getting in this groove. He's getting in a cadence. And the very first thing that He does is He begins to create the heavens and the earth, building a foundation for everything that is going on. Because what ended up happening is this: He had to start with the heavens and the earth in that cadence to start with the rest. He's beginning a process. And so verses 3 through 5 in Genesis chapter 1, look at what He says. He's done the heavens. He's done the earth. Then He says, "Let there be light." And what was it? There was light. And God saw the light was good. And so what did He do? And the darkness was night. There was an evening, there was a morning, one day. So what did he do? He created the heavens and the earth, and now he's in a groove, and he's going to do something else. There was darkness. And what did he do? He took the light to separate the darkness. The one part was the day. The next part was the night, or there was an evening and there was a morning, and he said, so that's one day. One day is a morning and an evening. And all of that was created just by making a light in the middle of the darkness. And what God did was he said there was evening and there was morning. And so you need to understand something. Not just did he give us a morning and an evening, he also created and gave us something absolutely beautiful. A sunrise and a sunset. He's got this cadence going. And it's following. And he's beginning to say, we're ordering things, ordering steps of all of this. Could God have spoken it all into existence in one moment? Yes, he could have. But he didn't, because he wanted to show that in our lives, there needs to be an order. Could he automatically save us and take us to heaven? Absolutely. But he doesn't. He begins to start creating things in our lives. And as he begins to create one thing, which leads to a next, and a next, and a next, and all of the things that's there, God gets in a groove or in a cadence in our lives as well as in the creation. And he's trying to tell us that if we can get in the groove or get in the cadence, that what ends up happening is it will get rid of the chaotic stuff that's going on in our life. And what a better time to start. This is a new year, a new opportunity. Not to stay in the same dull humdrums of last year and the year before and the year before. You see, there's certain things we can't change. But by the help of God, there's other things we can change and be a part of this change and getting in a certain rhythm or a certain cadence that is there. And so what did he do? He started this rhythm. Back in the year 2000 up to 2010, there was a TV series that was on. It was called 24. Some of you are shaking your heads like, I have never seen that before. Yep. And so others have seen it. So if you haven't, you have to understand that what they were trying to do was show how much you can cram in a day. And so they would do this. And so some of the days on the shows, they seemed to like just zoom right past. And then other days, it seemed like the days would just drag. And that's the way our life is. There are some days that we get up in the morning, and the next thing you know, the day is gone. And we're going to bed, and we wonder where it went. There's other days that we get up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it seems like it's nighttime already, and we look at our watch, and it's only 8:05. It just seems like that day continues to drag on and drag on and drag on. And sometimes we need to understand this. And that is this. There are going to be events that are going to happen during the day that are out of your control. There are some times there's nothing you can do about it. Okay? You're driving down the road, the person in front of you stops very suddenly, you're preoccupied, you run right into the back of them. Boy, that just ruined my day. No, that just ruined your control of your day. Because now you're no longer in control. You've got to wait for a policeman to come. You've got to wait for a tow truck. You've got to wait for the insurance. You've got to wait to get this. You've got to wait to do that. All of a sudden, your whole life is turned upside down. You're no longer in control. You see, we love control. We love to have our things in order. And the thing about it is, we can't. God does. God's got a plan for your life today. And as much as you want to control it, let me say this to you. Our control brings chaos. God's control brings order. And so what ends up happening is this. During the course of the day, now, I have to say this, okay? I have to pick on my wife, okay? My wife has OCD, okay? And maybe some of the rest of you do too. And if you've never lived with a person with OCD, it can be a nightmare. Because everything has to be in order. Okay? And so I watch her. She has a certain process when she goes to work at home now. And that right? And that is, I need to, if I can say, get through my emails. Is that the one thing? Okay. So one of the things that she loves to do is try to get through her emails all day long for that day. Okay? So what ends up happening? You're going through an email, then all of a sudden somebody sends an email that says, I need this fixed right now. Right? And so that needs to be fixed right now. Another person comes up and says, I need this done. I've gotten through 3 emails so far, and 2 of them have already sent me in different directions, both needing to be done right now. I can't do both of them. I can only do one. So which one is the most important? You have to decide. Which one do I need to do? Okay? So you pick that one, you do it, and guess what? It takes you 6 hours to do it. It's getting towards the end of the day for the other people, and they're still waiting for the answer to their email that was sent last night that you just got this morning. And by the way, as you're doing all of this, there's multitudes of others that are coming in. So the next thing you know, you've gotten through 5 emails that day, and you've got 500 more you got to get through. And you don't have enough time to do that. So what ends up happening? Chaos. Working all night into the morning, not getting sleep. And our life gets turned upside down because we're no longer in control. Something else is in control of us. We've lost control. And it's not just her job, it's all of us. All of us have things that we want to get done that day, and then all of a sudden something pops up and moves us in another direction, and we can't get it done. And we want, and then we look at the end of the day and we think, well, hold on, this isn't fair, because if this could have happened to me yesterday, I had time to do it yesterday. Or the day before, I had plenty of time to do it then. Why couldn't it have happened then, Lord? And he's saying, no, it didn't happen that day. It happened this day. And so we've got to understand that we're not in control of this. that the cadence is off order, out of order in the things that are there. And so what ends up happening is we get out of the groove, we get out of the rhythm. And then what ends up happening is this is what happens in our Christian life. I'm not just talking everyday life. This is what happens in our Christian life. God's trying to move us down a path. Satan is doing his best to distract us. We're getting in a good cadence. We're getting in a good rhythm. And the next thing we know, he's moving us in another total direction. He's got us thinking about something else that's going to happen. And the next thing that happens, our focus is no longer in the order that it should be on, or who brings the order into our life. Our mind and everything is on something else. What we need to do is understand that this year we're going to look at things from God's view and stop looking at it from our view. And the only way we can do that is get into a close relationship with him. Okay? I hear people all the time talk about Christianity as a religion. Christianity may be a religion, but we ain't talking about religions. We're talking about relationships. Relationships doesn't have a religion. God doesn't tell us to be this or to be that. He says, I need you to be in a relationship with me, and I need you to be my child. That's what I'm asking you to do. And so what we need to understand is when we begin to look at things, we need to look at things from a different perspective. Because sometimes we get stuck in looking at things our way, our perspective. What we need to do is begin to look at things through God's view and how he did this thing. So let's talk about God's design. In Genesis chapter 1, in verse number 4. Look at what he said. God saw that the light was good. And what did he do? He separated the light from the darkness. Now think about it for a minute. He separated the light from the darkness. And go to Genesis 1:14. Now look at this. He created light, remember? To separate light from darkness, day from night. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. They will serve as signs for seasons, for days, and for years. He didn't just arbitrarily create light. He gave us the sun. And what happens? The sun comes up, the sun goes down. That gives us one day. The sun not only comes up and goes down, but the earth is rotating around the sun. One full rotation is a year. In the Jewish calendar, they thought that every month had 30 days. The original calendar was 360 days. They weren't counting rotations of the sun. They were counting days and nights, or morning and evening, okay? Morning was from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening. Night was from 6 o'clock in the evening till 6 o'clock the next morning. That was morning and evening, okay? Their day, night, whatever you want. That 24-hour period of time was one day. Each month had 30 days. Their calendar only had 360 days in it until we got so brilliant and realized that, hold on a minute, that the sun, I could take the earth on this day at 365 days almost, 365 and a quarter days actually. It will be one full rotation, right? And so every 4 years we've got to add another one to get it back into sync. But what did he do with the day? He made the sun. In the night, the moon and the stars. It wasn't just a light, it was lights. It wasn't just one thing. He's beginning to make multiple things. You see, it's not just light here. There's light in the whole universe. Everywhere. There's other stars out there that are shining in the darkness. So that when they go out, they can see things. It isn't a total darkness. You know how bad it is if you were to lose all electricity and your batteries all went dead at the same time and it was a total eclipse. No light. And you're looking at darkness and you begin to understand there's something wrong. And what do? When we understand some things, God said that He made the suns and the moons and the stars to do what? To give us different seasons. We understand that. I don't care what man is saying, okay? Because man is not in control of the weather. They can say we're in global warming, freezing, whatever. But I'm going to tell you something. Man cannot make spring, summer, fall, and winter. That was God. He said there would be seasons. Long before we started making these calendars and everything else, God had already determined there was going to be 4 different seasons. And things were going to be that way. Why? Because there had to be seasons in order for some things to grow and for some things to become dormant. There were some things that were meant to be able to grow all of the time, so they needed a certain weather to be able to do that. So in certain parts of the earth, it is hot all the time. Other parts of the earth, it is like a rainforest. And everything is growing there because they need all of that moisture and everything else to continue to grow. And then we've got things like cactus that grow out there with very little water. And they will take all of the water as they can get it and store it up. And so we begin to see that He created the seasons, the days, and the years. So He's already telling us that the sun rotates. I love it when people say, well, you got to have science. The Bible is science. It's the best science book there is. Even before they started looking at all this stuff, God already told me it was there. We just hadn't seen it yet, or hadn't developed the things that we needed to see those things. So then He goes on in verses 26 and 27, and look at what He says. He says, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the horse, the creatures that crawl on the earth. So God created man in His own image. He created him in the image of God, and He created him but that doesn't go along with LBGTQRSTXB and all the other stuff. He says, no, this is the order. This is the order. And so what happens? When we get out of this order, we develop chaos. And guess what the world is facing today? Chaos. This isn't a Get Smart show. For some of you that have ever watched Get Smart, do you remember? He was always fighting against chaos. Those were the bad guys. Okay? This isn't that. Okay? Not that chaos. Their chaos was K-A-O-S. And this is C-H-A-O-S. Okay? So what do we end up doing? We find out that God now began, after creating all of this, He then turns around and creates man and woman. He creates them. And when you look at the stuff of what he created, they're like signal flares going up in the night and the day, showing all of these things that were there. And you need to understand something. Man and woman was not an afterthought. They were intentional. He was going to create a man and a woman. But in order to do that, I've got to build something else first. And all of this has to be in order for the greatest of the creation that I'm going to make, that's going to be made in my image. And we begin to see these things. So, what happens when we begin to start trying to bend the boundaries? Or what happens when we begin to ignore the signal flares that God has sent up? It throws everything out of sync, and it now begins a chaotic life. And this is what is going on right now. You think about it. Well, why are we having all the snowstorms? Why are we having all the tornadoes? Why this and why that? Because we as men have done things to throw off things. First of all, it's called sin. Our sin has corrupted all of creation, which has brought chaos to our life. Now they could say, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of all the electric vehicle, or I'm sorry, I wished. They're going to get rid of all the combustible engines, and everybody's going to go to electric engines, and that's going to bring order back into this world. No, it isn't. An electric vehicle will not bring order back to life. When we're still murdering each other, we're still killing each other, when we're still doing everything else. That doesn't solve murders. That doesn't solve the evil thoughts of men by making an electric vehicle. By giving everybody an education, by giving everybody this or everybody that, doesn't bring chaos. As a matter of fact, by educating people and giving them more and more education, it's made, I don't like to say this, but it's made us more stupid. Why? Because who's doing the education? Most of the time it's people who have no idea what they're talking about. Remember back in the 1960s, there was a gentleman who was well known to be an expert on raising of your children. His name was Dr. Spock. And he didn't have any kids. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't know how many kids do we have. I got a bunch. I can't count anymore. I've got kids everywhere, okay? I got grandkids, okay? And helping raise these children, my children, adopted children, other children, still hasn't made me an expert. Because my raising of my children, I forgot your name again, Erica. I cannot take some of the things that worked on my children and tell Erica, this is what you need to do. Because her children are living in a totally different world and a totally different time than my children. My techniques will bring chaos to her children. Some of them. Okay? As a matter of fact, some of the things that we did, we kind of laugh about it, okay? And we use this. We see kids in the store misbehaving. And what's the first thing we say? Oh, man, if they were my kids, oh, buddy, they wouldn't be screaming and hollering in this store. Or maybe they might be screaming and hollering, help me, they're going to kill me. You know, I hear this all the time. I'm watching. It's so hilarious. I've been in the store 20 minutes, and I know exactly who's over in the next aisle. The same kid that was there when I walked in. Because that kid hasn't shut up crying since they got in there. And what happens? I want this! You gave him that. And then he gets to the next aisle. I want this! Give it to me! You don't give it to me, I'm going to cry. Cry all you want to, I don't care. I'm not giving it to you. But what ends up happening? Man, you are embarrassing me. Everybody in the store is watching us. Here, let me just give you this so you'll shut up. And you go to aisle number 3, and man, they've got that. You've got 3 items that belong to you in that shopping cart. And you've got 300 that belong to the kid. Because you had to give them all of those things. And then we wonder why our bills are so much. So let's keep going. The chaos of life. Okay. So what do we end up having to do? If I really want to understand how to get my life in order, then what I need to understand is I've got to understand this from God's point of view. And I've got to get into God's cadence. Each and every one of us, God has a cadence for our lives. My cadence is not your cadence. And it's not being in lockstep with each other. Remember what cadence is. Cadence, the definition again, it's a modulation in reading aloud as implied by the structure and ordering of words and phrases in written text. In order, what? Cadence is a rising and a falling. In your life, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. You're not always going to be rising. But praise the Lord, I'm not also always going to be falling. Yes, I will have my mountains, and yes, I will have my valleys. That is part of life. God doesn't make it a flat plane, because if it was a flat plane, every one of us could accomplish everything. But God says, no, there are some peaks and there are some valleys. And there are times, I know a lot of times you think, I wish I could enjoy the peaks more. May I say this to you? Going up the mountain gives me strength. Coming down the mountain doesn't give me any strength. Going through the valley helps me depend on someone, because I know that I've got to get some strength, because I'm going to climb a mountain here, because it's coming. So what do? Here's the thing that we got to understand. You can't live life at 100 miles an hour. There are times the vehicle's got to slow down. There are times the vehicle needs to be recharged. And the one thing that we need to understand is God created all of this, and He created it in a fashion to have order. And so Jesus comes along, and He's talking to His disciples, And his disciples are asking questions. And the question is this, Lord: how is it that we watch you every day get up, and we watch your routine? Your routine is you get up and you go away from us, away from everyone else, and you go somewhere and you pray. As a matter of fact, we've kind of watched you. And we've watched when you've come back. There's something different about you. When you start facing the day and everybody starts criticizing you and everybody wants to get rid of you and everybody wants to kill you, when we see these crowds coming and we see all of the things that you're doing and we know that it's draining of you, how do you do this? Can you teach us to pray like you? And he says, yeah. This isn't my prayer that you need to pray. This is the pattern in which I pray in. And what you need to do is you need to develop a pattern of prayer also. And what's the first thing? We're praying to the Father. We're praying to God. And what do we ask? Jesus said, here's all I ask for. Give me my daily bread. I'm not asking for tomorrow's bread because it's probably going to get stale. I need fresh bread tomorrow. I need bread to get me through today because I don't even know if tomorrow's going to come. All I know is I'm right here, I'm right now, and God, I need to have order in my life. I've got to be able to follow these steps. I've got to get this energy that is there. And in Psalms chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, and we're getting close. Look at what he says. The psalmist, starting out the psalm, he says this: how happy is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instructions, and he meditates on it day and night. Did God create? Day and night. Not just during the daytime, guys and gals. Even while you're sleeping. Meditate. Why do I tell you that one of the greatest things to do is fall asleep listening to the Bible? Whether you realize it or not, you are meditating in your sleep. I wonder who came up with that. I think that was God. Cool. He is like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bear its fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. There are some things that you need to understand, and that is this. The psalmist is giving us some very, very important instructions that need to be followed. Go back to verse number 1, if you would. And let me show you what he says. How happy is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the company or pathway with sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. You know what he's saying? There are times, ladies and gentlemen, that you need to cut off relationships with certain people. They're toxic. They will kill you. We want to be friends with everybody, but let me say this to you. You can't be friends with everybody unless they're a friend of God. I can love the sinner, but I don't have to love the sin. But what do? We say, well, we can't get rid of that person. No, we're not getting rid of them. We're loving them, but I don't have to hang around with them. Last night, I'll guarantee you, there were a lot of people that called themselves Christians, all got drunk to celebrate. And they're not in churches today. That's their business, okay? Wrong, but it's their business. Why? They'll pay for it. Why? They're not being blessed. We lose blessings because sometimes we hang around with toxic people. And we get caught up. How many times have you had somebody that you know got arrested just because they were in the car or in the presence of someone when that person was doing something that you didn't know that they were going to do? A bunch of kids in high school out driving in cars, looking for fun. So what does one person do? They bust the mailbox, or they do this, or they do that. Guess who gets arrested? Everybody in the car, if they get caught. And what God is telling us is this. He's saying that whatever we do will prosper if we learn to do these things that are there. And so when we learn to listen to Him and develop that relationship with Him, we get into this cadence. And when we get into this cadence, He says, of meditating day and night, He says that what's going to happen is our lives are going to flourish or prosper. In other words, He's going to bless us because of our efforts, because we're in cadence with Him. Jesus, in Matthew 6:11, He told us about our daily bread, okay? And He understood it very well, because in Matthew chapter 6, verse number 34, He says, each day has enough trouble of its own. I'm not worried about what tomorrow's trouble is going to be, okay? Because there's enough today get me off kilter. Okay? So Psalms 118 and 24 is this. He says, today is the day the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. So, let us finish with Psalms chapter 8, verses 3 and 4. Okay. Now the Psalms are poems, and they should be read in a cadence. Now you can read it like this. When I observe your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you set in place, what is a human being that you remember him, a son of man that you look after him? You can read it like that. I read it. And what did I get out of it? Maybe a little. But what if I read it like this? When I observe your heavens, all the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you set in place. What is a human being that you remember him? A son of man that you look after him? What is a human, what is a human being that you remember him? A son of man that you look after him. There's emphasis put on certain things. Somebody else may read it and put the emphasis somewhere else. But there's something emphatic about that to the person who's reading it. And that's why I say to you sometimes that you need to read the Bible out loud. Not just read it internally to yourself. There are times, and I know people say, well, why do you read it out loud? Can I tell you why you read the Bible out loud? Yeah. Remember when, way back when they were teaching you run, Dick, run, see Sally, run, go catch Spot? Remember that? They were reading some other stuff. But when you read that and you heard it out loud, you begin to put words together. And also you started looking at the picture and you started seeing the words in action. The Bible, ladies and gentlemen, when you read it out loud, comes to life. You begin to see it in motion. Your imagination begins to start picturing what's occurring. And now you become totally involved and engrossed in it. And guess what? It's like you read, my wife could probably tell you everything that happens in Harry Potter. Okay? And that's why I won't read it with her anymore. Because something will be read, and it gets to the end, and she says, now did you catch that? Now you need to remember that. Why? Because you're going to need it over here. It's like, you're telling me the story. You know? I want to watch it for myself. But no, it don't happen. But that's the same way with reading the Bible sometimes. What happens is we read the Bible and then we allow somebody else to tell us what's happening. You know, it's okay to be taught, but you've got to experience it. You can't experience God through me. Okay? What happens is God uses me to help you experience it, but you can't experience it through my life. It's not the same. The Word of God is going to react with you differently because you are very unique. You have different DNA. You have different experiences of life. Even if we go through the same event, it's different. Even if the outcome is the same, it's different. It may affect you one way and me another. Because God has an order in all of this. And He's got a cadence in all of this. And we've got to find the cadence, every one of us individually. But as a church, we need to realize that chaos is not God's best for you. That cadence is a healthy rhythm. And what does it lead? It leads us to a life that's flourishing. Now, some people will look at this church and they'll say, I'm not coming here anymore. It's dying. There's only a few people going there. May I say this to you? Jesus never had 300 people. He only had a few. But this church is still alive. been working with a lady who we'll share with you soon. That all of a sudden, in her latter days of life, she has now really come to understand what it means to have a relationship with God. How did she do that? Through coming here, through talking and conversations, searching everywhere else and never finding the answers. You see, God does, and what some people don't understand is even in churches, God does weeding out sometimes. There are sometimes you've got to cut down the weeds in order for the grass to grow. And that happens sometimes in churches too. Sometimes what we do is we get involved in the numbers. Been there and done that. And I know what that's like. But can I also tell you what? And I've shared it with you. I can't tell you how many people that God just is putting in my life. And I'm not saying me, because it's here. It's the praying of all of us together. That all of a sudden, some people were turning around and saying, listen, can we talk? I've tried everything else and nothing's working. And all of a sudden they start talking. They say, where do you get this from? It's in the scripture. I've been in church all my life. I've never heard this before. No, neither have I. It's brand new to me too, some of it. And I've been in church all my life. And there's a lot that I'm learning and I'm fascinated with, because it's amazing. Because God is working and He's not finished. He's changing lives, He's changing families, and He's not done. My question is are you going to get in cadence with what's going on? Are you going to watch the rhythm that God is putting here? Because you can watch things starting to occur and starting to happen. He's not done, and He's not finished.